Hello and welcome to season 4 of Own Your Divine Light show. I am Isla Serona Miller, and this show is called Accelerate Your Ascension During the Chaos and Pandemic Times that we are going through. And I was given, my special spiritual name, which I'm just stepping into. So I'm sharing that with this audience right now. So I am really embodying this at this time. So it feels wonderful to introducing you to me as Isla Serona. And we've all been going through so much right now, and it's feeling like things are lifting, but yet who knows what's on this horizon yet. And we are meant to create a new way of being. And today's guest has truly brought through a way of being that was brand new to me. And I am so excited to talk about this with our amazing guest, Dr. Megan Rose Woolover. And Megan Rose has a doctorate in East-West psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and a master's degree in religion and society from the Graduate Theological Union. She is an initiated ceremonial magician, a Shakti tantric practitioner, and a senior apprentice in fairy seership, which I never heard of that. I have to hear a little more about that. I love that. She serves as an ordained interfaith minister and psycho-spiritual counselor and is the executive director of the Entheosis Institute. She lives in San Francisco, and I'm so thrilled to have you here. Welcome, Dr. Megan Rose. I'm so thrilled to have you here because, as I said, your work is incredible and such a new understanding of ancient knowledge that we're ready for. I think we're just ready for this now, and that's why it's coming through. And powerful, just such a powerful understanding of what you're bringing through. So my first question is, you talk about how the connection to the divine self is two things. It's actionable, and that also the divine self is different from our higher self. And this is a whole new realm to dive into for me. I don't know how to differentiate that. So let's start there. And I'd love to hear what, how you see that.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I should say that, it does depend on your cosmology and the system that you're working within. But one of the systems that I work within, which is Western ceremonial magic, understands that, we have many parts to ourself. We have, to use more traditional psychotherapeutic terms, we have the ego, which is the mundane self. We have the id, which is kind of like our animal or primal self. And then we have the superego. But that can be divided into even more sort of refined thinking. And so the higher self is what we would think of as our wise self or our guardian self. In as much as it is the part of us that kind of has that bigger picture of our life. The divine self sits in traditional Western esoteric cosmology above the higher self. And it is, if you understand Jung's archetypes through the lens of actual intelligences that we're working with, not just sort of a psychologized version of ourselves, but these archetypes are actually alive, animate, what some might call divinity. Then you kind of start getting a sense of what the divine self might be. It is a divine or an archetypal form that we are a fractal of. I like to liken it to if we are like a finger or a fingertip on the body of divinity. And so as divinity extends itself out into manifestation, we are at the furthermost and the most carnal or the most embodied, right? We are the divine embodied or the divine in flesh. And we have all these other lovely sub-personalities rolling around inside of us as well. But we can, when we begin to do work with the divine self, we can begin to understand that there's a flavor that we have come in with. In some traditional more hermetic traditions, they talk about the rays. So there are these different rays of creation. Each of the rays have a different energy. And each of us came in on one of those rays, various different rays. And as those rays extend out, they differentiate even more into all these cosmologies of deities that we see, across the world. There's pantheons of deities with different functions and different attitudes and different agendas. And so the divine self work is really like, who am I embedded in, right? Who am I an expression of? And this shows up around the world, actually. When I was doing my research, one of the things that I discovered is that there are processes in various different cultures for understanding who your divine self is, and for sometimes it's the idea of placing it in, sometimes it's the idea of bringing it out from inside of you. And so you're in this relationship of both understanding that you are an expression of divinity, and also that divinity is a piece or a portion of who you are meant to express in this world. And so the idea that the divinity or the divine self is actionable, I think, is really key. When we understand that we are an embedded piece or an expression, that fingertip on the body of the divine, and that fingertip can do things in the physical and make effects in the physical that the divine can't, and that the divine can do things sort of out, in the big picture that we don't necessarily have access to. You begin to get a sense of the symbiotic relationship that we hold with these beings, with these intelligences, and that we have the potential, at least, to be divinity in action, bringing forth into the world the will, the ideas, the blessing, sometimes the agenda of whatever the divine being that we're serving is.
That's a beautiful description. I mean, you hear about it, but then to put it into words like you just did was really beautiful, because it was so clear to understand, like, in this lifetime, we're meant to bring in all these aspects of who we are. As you say, we're that fingertip, but we're supposed to be collecting more to make this body show up, like the divine body show up, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so we find others that are doing this work, and then we, assemble a hand or an arm. And I think what's beautiful about this is that the divinity that I'm here to embody isn't the same as what you're here to embody, Isla, or the other, because that when if I can put my tantric hat on for a second here, when you understand that the divinity begins maybe in a origination point, or a bindu, a singularity, but then expands out. And so even if, for example, you and I were both to be in relationship with, let's say, the goddess Sophia, right? That's this sort of bigger being that we're working with. But as she differentiates herself down into her devotees, that expression of Sophia is unique to me or unique to you. Or, as I was saying with the tantrics understand this really well, and in the Indo-European or the Indic context, the idea that deity is these larger beings, but then there are almost endless permutations of how divinity can show up. So, for example, Kali has Adya Kali, but she's got, all these other forms, Dakshin Kali and Shmashana Kali, that are these various permutations that sometimes are as unique as the region within which she's worshipped. And so, and in that context, the idea that one has a divine self is this understanding of the Ishta Devi, or the chosen deity. And that's the deity that you choose, but also that chooses you, that you work in relationship with. And that part of the sadhana, or the spiritual practice in that tradition, is to find one's Ishta Devi. And one can go on this elaborate, journey of trying to find one's patron deity, and And ultimately, if I'm putting my Western hat back on here for a second,
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
that that deity, that discovery of deity, is actually the discovery of our own divine self, because we are definitely an expression of that
Mm,
in our own unique flavor. Yeah.
yeah. Wow. And that word Ishtadini, I had never heard that before. So where does that come from? Is which language, which culture? Is it like a certain culture? Is it a religion? What is
So
Ishtadevi?
Ishtadevi is the Hindu term.
Oh,
The
it's
so in
Hindu. Okay.
Mhm. And
I
Ishta
just
Devi
wasn't
means
familiar with that.
chosen. Devi means Deva, or Devi means deity, god or goddess.
Deva, like a
Mhm,
deity. Got
mhm,
it. Got it.
mhm.
Well, they're new. Some of the words you use are different. They're newer. Well, I know you've gone deep because you are religious. You have like a religious background as well, as far as you've delved into religious studies. So
Mhm.
you've gone into the world religions. I know that you do. That's part of your wisdom. And yeah, so that's beautiful. So this is all about connecting to awakening our divinity within, like you just said, which I think is just, so beautiful. And this is in so much alignment with what I did to create the show, Own Your Divine Light.
Mhm.
I mean, I did it to just connect to our own inner essence, but then you bring it out to this amazing level. I mean, you're looking at, like you said, the big picture. You're seeing the big reason that this is all happening. I mean, we came down into these smaller, what you call fractals of that being, or those aspects of that being that we are meant to, bring through. And everyone has a flavor. I love that. Everyone has a flavor. That was really, it's true. I mean, we're unique as we're meant to be.
Mhm.
So you call, and then you call this entheosis.
Mhm.
And entheosis, I mean, just to say the word, it's a little bit of a tongue twister. You have to kind of like say it a few times. But I tried to look it up, but I don't, did you make that word up, or is that a real word?
I didn't make the word up. It originates in the term Entheos, which
Okay.
I believe is the Greek.
Okay. Because I
Um,
was looking it up and I'm like, I can't find
so
it.
you
So
can
it's
find
taken from Greek.
Entheos, and Entheos is literally the divine within us. And you may have heard the term entheogen, which is their agents, often associated with sacred medicines that
Mhm.
awaken the divine within us.
Ah.
And entheosis, it's a sort of an older Christian term that was used for this understanding of the awakening the Christ within,
Mm.
this process of awakening
Hmm.
the divinity within us. And I'm trying to sort of reclaim it and say, no, it's not just about Christianity and apotheosis. It's actually
Yeah.
about the birthright of what we are here to do as the human project on planet Earth right now, which is to embody our divine selves and to understand that the divine is already inside each and every one of us. And our work, should our job, should we choose to accept it, right,
Yeah, exactly.
is to wake that fractal, wake that piece up, and give more and more space for it in our lives, more and more capacity to be in that energy, as just our way of being in the world, so that
Mhm.
we can bring more of that gift and more of, and ultimately, I think the big agenda with all of this is so that we can create a planet that is rooted in the utopian ideals of a world that works for everyone and everyone needs met,
Absolutely.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Utopia isn't about never having problems. It's not
Of course.
about
Of
never
course.
having issues. It's about finding a way that we can live with the planet, live with other humans, live with other species and beings on this planet in an
Mhm.
integrated
Mhm.
and integral way that allows our planet to thrive and all the beings on the planet to thrive.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's so key to what we're doing. I mean, when you said it's our birthright, that just gave me chills because I mean, that's what I've understood now. Finally, it takes a while to get this whole, like I've been reading books since 1999 about, how to, what's this all about? What are we meant to do? And they kept teasing us. I kept getting, we were teased all the way along this journey. Like they wouldn't tell us too much. Like, well, we can't tell you that yet. Like you kind of get that. And, even when you're connecting to, the divine books and different things, like you're not ready yet. You're not ready to know. So
Mhm.
look at, we're ready to know now. So
Mhm.
entheosis, what a great word. And so to connect with your divine self, you said there are like steps and there's categories that you use. You talk about devotion and discernment and discipline. So these are part of your process. How do you have that? How does that work, your process?
Yeah,
First step
so
one.
so the idea that we have a divine self that is actionable and that we want to do that is sort of the key. And then we devote ourselves unwaveringly to that
Mhm,
work, which
mhm.
doesn't mean we're perfect or we're, spiritually bypassing all the things in our life. It
Right,
just means
right.
that there is a devotional aspect and understanding that there's this rarefied aspect of me that I really want to know, like
Mhm,
you would
mhm.
know a beloved, like you would know an intimate partner. And so once you don't even really have to have the name or cosmological identity of your divine
Right. Oh yeah,
to devote
absolutely.
to that process. You say this is part of my devotional practice, and whatever system or lineage you choose, there's a few different lineages that practice this. That's part of the first step, is making this part of your devotion. And then the second piece is really cultivating discernment. So, as I said before, we have all these different inner personalities that are at play at any given moment. And we have to learn to discern between what is the voice of my divine self and what is the voice of, any other of these, what I call inputs that could be at play at any given time in your life. We have both our inner personalities, but then we have like society, and we have ancestors, and we have
Mm,
all of these various voices, if you will, that in non-ordinary
a little
beings.
bit of an interruption here. And
Oh, where did you lose
yeah,
me?
hold on. Storm here. So action again. So I'm just going to give it a minute just so we can clear this a sec, because I couldn't hear you. It was like
Okay,
dragging
where
through. It
where
wouldn't
did you
come and
lose
clear.
me?
Probably let's see. What did you say? I'm trying to remember. Um oh gosh, I can't remember. We were talking about I was so busy trying to like tell you
I
to
think it was
stop.
around the
I
time
wasn't I couldn't.
I think it was around the time I started talking about discernment and the personalities.
Yes, it was right. Let's start at discernment again. That would be
Okay,
great. And we could cut this part out a little. So
okay.
I apologize to the audience. If any of this gets through, we are in the middle of a big snow thunderstorm that just is passing by, and we're still getting the thunder lightning effect. So
I
that's the
I
way
bring
nature
the
works.
big guns.
I think
What
she
can
is.
I
See, this is it.
say?
I get that, Megan. Megan is bringing the boom, and we're getting that right now. And so the universe is responding.
Yeah, we'll just dance with it. So so the second piece then is discernment. And
Mhm.
discernment is really this understanding that, we have all of these inner personalities that are at play in any given moment. We also have all the external inputs,
Mhm.
like our society, our media, our ancestors, and
Mhm.
our epigenetic karma, as well as the various deities and the various spirit beings that are around us and that we are in relationship with. And so the discernment piece is like, how do I discern what is, for example, just Megan and my own agenda or my own, desires, from
Mhm.
what is actually true guidance from my divine self versus like any of these other various things that might be at play at any one moment, at any given moment. So that's the discernment piece. We devote to the work, and then we learn through various processes to
Mhm.
discern
Mhm.
and to get a really clear connection. It's kind of like, being on a phone call with someone, or a Zoom, right? And
Mhm.
having a
Yep,
really clear connection.
exactly. You've had a
having a
good example of that right now.
Yeah, exactly. So the connection is really clear, and you're not getting, any interference from,
Mhm,
any of these other things.
mhm.
Or if you are, you can name them and identify them and work with them appropriately, right? So that's where
Yeah.
some of the psychotherapeutic models come in and can be really
Mhm.
useful, particularly some of the inner parts dialogue that you see in
Yes,
some
yes.
transpersonal psychology, where you're really
Mhm.
getting clear on what are the different parts that are at play with me. And also some of the work of family constellation work can be really useful for that as well. And then finally,
Yes, yes, that's powerful.
yeah. So then finally, we talk about discipline. And I always
Mm.
like to caveat when I say discipline, because people sometimes hear discipline and they think, oh,
Yeah.
it's this horrible thing that I'm going to have to shoehorn myself into with all this resistance. And I like to say, like, let's back that up a little bit and talk about the
Mhm,
root of the
mhm.
word discipline, which is disciple.
Mm,
So we're
yeah.
talking about being, again, kind of with the energy of the devotee, we're being in discipleship of or with
Wow.
this divine self. So it comes in, it guides us, and it gives us the information that we need to live a life that allows more of its blessing, more of its guidance to come through. And that invariably means changes. It means things that we need to put into place in our life
Yeah.
that optimize our mind, body, spirit temple, so that we can be in alignment with this divine self. And so,
Mhm,
for some people, discipline just can look like changing the way that you eat, eliminating certain
mhm,
things from your diet that may be causing some toxicity in your system. For other people, it could be daily movement practices.
mm,
Usually, it involves some sort of daily process or practice of tuning in and giving. Just like any relationship in your life, the divine self is a relationship. And the more that you
mm,
spend time in conversation with it, the better you're going to get to know it. Very much like our human relationships. If we don't
mm.
spend time talking to our beloveds, if we don't spend time and make them a priority, we just don't have a very intimate relationship with them. We don't have very close relationships. So we do this, and we think of relationship with the divine self as very much a relationship that is
Mm.
something that we practice and that we evolve and that we co-create with this divine part of ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love, it's just exactly, the kind of the path I've always been on since I started. And I think many of us are right now, that and I think part of the beauty of the chaos in the world right now is that we are being allowed to connect with that divine self, because we're being forced to, no matter whether you like it or not. I mean, you can choose to do it or not,
Mhm,
but if you've really been on this road and saying, well, I've always wanted to, and
mhm,
now I've had the chance. So now I get to connect with my divine self. Well, how do I
mhm,
do that? So
mhm,
you're giving some great ideas for that,
mhm,
just to be able to set aside this time, because it is so important to connect and to make that intimate relationship and to work with the dark and the light of you. I mean, we have to be, connected to all of it. Because I know when you said there's different aspects, you have to have discernment. Well, there's a lot to do with that too, to be aware of, and you really need to be aware. You just can't go in blindsiding, because you might not be happy with some of the results. And you may be just taken off track where you don't
yeah,
want to be,
yeah, yeah.
and that's the discernment. Yeah.
And I think also really making space for the variety of ways that deity can show up.
Mm.
Sometimes here in the West, where we've been maybe a little oversaturated with monotheism,
Mhm.
we think that the divine, or even if we're parsing things out into god goddess, that looks like a certain way, and
Mm.
that it expresses a certain way. The sort of goddess light energy, or the god expanded energy, and those are two expressions of divine, but they are by no means the entire um
Spectrum. Yeah.
spectrum.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, we have really powerful, potent, earth-based, and even otherworld or underworld beings that are holy deity beings that are chthonic and that are connected to our primordial energies, our vitality. And those beings are just as holy and just as sacred as some of our upper world beings that have maybe more of a lighter energy. And so then the other job is to learn to discern, okay, is this a primal aspect of myself or a primal deity that I'm working with? And how is that different from, say, maybe some unhealed parts of myself? Because sometimes the potency that shows up in the primal beings can feel scary, it can feel dangerous, it can feel edgy, and that will oftentimes cue into unresolved trauma inside of ourselves, and then we end up labeling it as bad or evil or negative, when actually it's just this life force energy, sometimes called kundalini, right, or shakti. And that is, it's a very different thing than being sort of in our more wounded self. And so we learn to it's one of my teachers calls it disentangling. So we're sort of like disentangling the snarls of the threads that have manifested in, what in psychotherapeutic terms they'd call complexes, right? So we're sort of learning to disentangle these things very gently, very lovingly, with a lot of mindfulness, and get really clear on what's at play.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense. I mean, as a kid, I was very enthralled with the gods and goddess books. I mean, I would, the kids would be reading Dick and Jane, and I'd be reading gods and goddesses, and every country I could get my hands on. I just couldn't get enough of it. And, when you talk about monotheism, we're so trained to believe in one God, but what's that all about? I mean, you brought this in, and I'm like, I was listening to different things you were talking about, and I'm thinking, well, it is so true. We're so, like narrow-minded. We're in the tunnel of a monotheistic God. But when you look at the ancient religions, there's many. And they called that paganism. But what was paganism? It was just earth energies. It was connecting to all the different deities that, contribute to everything that we are, having an experience with on this planet, or in any cosmic area would be living. But it's fascinating to talk about that and to look at that through that lens, because I never really, I love the different beings and deities, and I connect to different ones all the time, and I love that. But now, to get juicier, I want to get into the divine self and why we need to know it. So you said the divine self, and then what's the higher self? So what you said, you told us what the divine self is, which is the bigger one, the biggest one that like it's the big, like it's the central sun of us, right? And who is the divine? Now, who's the higher self? Who's that?
So in the Western tradition, we talk about the higher self as sitting just above the sort of supramental, or
The crown.
the crown. Yeah. So like as I'm looking at it, or seeing it, envisioning it, it's like, it's not a hard and fast division. First of all, there are ways that, like, astrally, the energies overlap and dip into and up through each other. But in general, the idea is, and this comes out of my research, when I was speaking with a very highly initiated ceremonial magician in the Western Hermetic tradition. And he described it as this. So the higher self sits just above the mundane self. And then, and is nested in the beginning. So the beginning of the higher self sits in our body, and then the top of the higher self sits in, you're sort of seeing this, so it sits here, and then the top of the higher self sits at the very beginning of the divine self. And then that moves up, and we move into monads and soul groups and all that sorts of things.
Got it. Okay.
So the higher self is, the way I experience it and the way I understand it, it is like our wise, loving parental self. It's the part that, when they talk about the why, tap into your wise self, or tap into
Okay.
the part of you that is benevolent and really, really loves and cares and wants you to be a wholly functioning, integrated, happy human being. The divine self is, as it expands outward, connects to other people who are connected to that divinity, and
Mm,
carries the flavoring or the coloring of that divinity. So if you think of it, the higher self is more about you, and the divine self is more about your mission, or this purpose, this ray, if you will, that you
okay.
came in
Okay.
on.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's really good, because I never knew enough to think about differentiating that. I almost thought of them as the same. So you have made it such a clear,
And they're
beautiful.
nested within each other, so there are
Right.
functions that both
Right.
can kind of do. But
Yeah.
it's useful for devotional purposes, right? We're talking
Hmm.
about devotion, discernment, discipline, to understand. In the Western tradition, we call this the holy guardian angel, the HGA.
The
That's the
HGA.
divine self. It's the holy guardian angel. It is this
Okay.
this this being that you can have a relationship with, that you are nested within, but it is also greater than you.
Yes. 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 Because I was going to ask what HGA was, because I couldn't remember, because I remember listening to you talk about it. I'm like, oh, I can't remember what she said about that. So you
Yeah.
just clarified that. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
so the holy guardian angel, in the Western Hermetic tradition, there's a whole operation that one can undertake for what they call knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, and it is a deeply ritualized 3-day, fairly arduous, hermetically sealed, where the term hermetically sealed comes from, container in which you do a variety of different things, austerities and rituals and things, to make contact with that holy guardian angel. And so it's definitely something that we have to labor for, that we work towards. Whereas you
Mhm.
can tap into your higher self at any given moment, right? The higher self is sort of always there. The divine self, or the holy guardian angel, or the Ishta Devi, there's this idea that we quest for that. We look for it, we search for it, we long to step into relationship with it. And it's not that we quest for it because that it is not, because that it's putting up barriers to us. We
Mhm.
quest
Mhm.
for it because that it is part of our refinement process. And I believe it's one of the things that our species is gifted with as part of our transformation, or our some might call ascension or awakening process.
Ah, that's amazing. I mean, that's just, it's so much clarity. You're bringing just so much to that. That's amazing. That's beautiful information. It makes so much sense to me. The holy guardian angel, people go, well, I connect with mine all the time. But is that the true higher HGA? You
Well,
know,
there's the idea of guardian angels, right? So
right, right.
and we're talking to guardian angels, and then the HG is a slightly different thing, because it is this, and that's why I call it the divine self, just to avoid confusion. And there are
Ah,
other names
okay.
for it. That name was coined, I think, by McGregor Mathers back at the turn of the 19th to 20th century, and it's one word for it. The Ishta Devi we've talked about before. Um, in the Afro-Caribbean traditions of the Vodou, they talk about the matet, and this is, the matet actually means, the tet is the head, and it's the
Yeah.
master of your head, and that is another very fairly arduous ritual that one goes through. I think the coucher, that ritual takes about a week, and it's all about cleaning out and cleaning yourself off, so that being can really take up residence and really shine out. And that is actually, in that tradition, that is the process for becoming a priest or a priestess, a mambo or ungan, in that lineage. And that, again, was part of my research. I interviewed people from the Vodou tradition, and learned a little bit
Yeah.
about that,
Yeah. Oh,
that
so
process comparatively with these other divine self technologies.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was just fascinated by all those. We're going to get to that too, but I wanted to talk about what is spirit marriage, because that's the big thing.
That's the,
'Cause
that's
spirit
where we're
marriage
going
was,
with this. Well,
oh yeah, why not? Why
yeah.
not?
So spirit
Because
marriage, yes.
go ahead. Well, to me, it's something that people, I didn't even know what that was. So I thought, wow, if you're bringing it up, that we need to, it's ready. We're ready to know.
Yes. So spirit marriage is when a human steps into a bonded, intimate, or committed relationship with a specific deity. So we've been talking
Yeah,
about,
that's incredible.
yeah, so we've been
It's an
talking about the
incredible
bonded,
thought.
intimate relationship with our divine self, which I personally,
Mhm.
there are others that would challenge me on this, and I respect and honor their difference of opinion, but I personally feel that the divine self process is a form of spirit marriage, because we're stepping into indwelled, intimate, bonded relationship with this aspect. It's just in the
Sure.
divine self, we're understanding it as an aspect of ourself.
Yep.
In
Yep.
spirit marriage, practitioners step into a bonded, intimate relationship with what would be considered an externalized deity, or
Mm.
a deity that is non-native to the practitioner. But even as I say that, there are examples. For example, one of my co-researchers, when I did this research, she is both married to the goddess Kali, and she is Kali is her Ishta Devi, is her divine self. So, when you, especially when you start looking at things from different cultures, you start seeing that where one culture has maybe some hard and fast rules, or in their spiritual technology, in their tradition, there's some reasons why they do it this way. There might be other traditions that do it slightly differently. And then, if you're not, in my case, when you're coming from outside of those traditions, because those are not my native traditions,
Mhm.
Vodou or the Shakta tantric practice, I practice that and I'm trained in that, but it is, I'm sort of an outsider practicing and studying in that lineage. So when you look at it from a Western perspective, where we've lost a lot of this teaching,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
you realize, well, we're going to have to sort of figure it out for ourselves and figure
Mm.
out what's going to work on a case by case basis. In my experience, it's really working out your spirituality for yourself. So in the West, the best example we have of spirit marriage is, there's a couple of examples. So if you look back in the early Genesis accounts, you see this really interesting story where it says the sons of God, which are the angels, looked down on the
Mm.
daughters of man, which are women,
Mm.
and saw that they were beautiful and they desired them. And they came down and they mated together. And this is the origin myth of like the Nephilim and the giants and the
Mhm.
heroes. And so we have these sort of hybridized humans then that have angelic and human, and depending on how much of a literal approach you're going to take to the scriptures, we at least have this idea that humans can step into these extraordinary relationships with otherworldly beings. Moving on, we have the story that we, as folks in a Western Christian context, we all know about the story of Mary and the angel, right? The
Mhm.
angel that
Mhm.
came to her,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, bada bing, bada boom, she's pregnant with Jesus, and so there is some ways that you can read that text and understand that it was perhaps a divine impregnation, either by the angel or by the
The
Hebrew,
deity.
yeah, deity himself. And then we have this Christed being, this
Mhm.
Yeshua, who is both divine and human, which biblical scholars have debated on for centuries, right? How much human was he? How much divine was he? And all sorts of interesting things happen as a result of those debates. So it's certainly not outside of our purview here. We just
Mm.
don't think of it as something that we as contemporary spiritual practitioners can take on. But the core of my research was actually, I mean, I did all of the historical analysis looking transculturally all across the world at these different practices, which are there. They're there in almost every continent and almost every culture. But I was really interested in how contemporary practitioners take on this practice of stepping into deeply wedded and bonded relationships with deities or any really otherworldly, non-human, non-physical being. And I found about 7 or 8 active traditions on the planet. I'm sure there are more, because that, as I've concluded my research, even more instances are coming up. But for the 10 years that I did this research, I found about 7 or 8 different traditions, and they were the Celtic fairy seership that we mentioned earlier, the Shakta Tantra, the West African tradition of the Dagara people in Burkina Faso. Pardon?
The last group you said, where are they from? I don't
Burkina
know
Faso.
what they are.
Yeah, they're in West Africa.
Okay.
And
just curious of what part of the world. Yeah,
West Africa and Burkina Faso. They're the Dagara people.
Is it the Dogons?
It's present. No,
are you saying
Dagara.
Like the
No.
Go ahead, spell it.
Dagara. Dagara.
Okay. All right. I wasn't familiar with them either. I wasn't sure whether I was hearing Dogon or Dagara. Okay, now I got it.
Yeah, Dagara. Yeah. And the there's this is prevalent in a lot of the witchcraft and the traditions of the traditions that include but also predate sort of Wicca and the earth-based spirituality of the various witchcraft lineages.
Okay.
It's also, as I've mentioned, present in the Vodou tradition of Haiti and the Voodoo tradition of New Orleans.
Yes.
And then the Hermetic operation of the Holy Guardian Angel, which I include as sort of part of this. And there is one other that is escaping my mind, but it'll come to me. So 6 or 7 different traditions that, and then just, I would say there's sort of there's a contemporary secular version of this that's arising, where people are actually being contacted by beloved dead, and usually spirits that have passed on and that were of some elevated status. So usually people that were stars or famous or had some sort of elevated status of celebrity within our culture, and they're being contacted by these spirits and asked to step into these bonded relationships with them, and have and the purpose of all of this, I should say, is that these relationships, these spirit marriages, depending on the tradition that you're working in, but by and large are meant to bring forth co-creative projects. So in my case, when I began all of this research over 20 years ago now, it was because a spirit came to me and said, I want to marry you. And at that time I had no clue. I didn't know who the spirit was exactly. I didn't even know if it was a thing. I was, I didn't know what to do. And so I went to start researching it, found a couple of my primary teachers that are practitioners of this in the Shakta Tantric and in the fairy seership tradition, studied with them for a number of years, went through my own spirit, the revelation and the deepening of the relationship and the eventual marriage. And all of that was concomitant with me writing a dissertation on this. There was a point where it was like, the spirit told me, you need to research this. You have an academic background and you need to do this as a piece of formal research, because this material is going to be needed. where your species is headed. It's going to be needed for people to know about, because you're not the only person going through this, and there's really not anything out there for people to like grab onto to understand what's going on for them. And so I ended up writing all of this material and researching all this material and turning it into a book, which will be coming out next year in March, 2022 in March, about this, because that I wrote the material for what I felt like I needed to know 20 years ago when I started going through this initiation process. And that led me into the research and into the material that I'm sharing with you today. And hopefully, you know, will reach the people that are maybe either going through or are interested in this kind of a, I like to call it seasoning. It seasons us when we step into these co-creative relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you say co-creative, what are we meant to create? What is the co-creation all about?
Yeah. So, you know, in my case, it was this material. So the spirit came to me and was like, okay, because it, you know, I had the masters in religion already. And so, you know, I think the spirit kind of that I work with, Gwen, sort of chose me because that it knew that I would not just, it knew that I would take a really like rigorous approach to understanding this. And that was kind of what was needed. And that our project together was to bring this material out. But I have other clients that I work with and colleagues that hold these kind of marriages, and everybody's co-creative project is different. You know, some people have art that comes through. Some people have service pieces that come through. Like one of my clients is a death doula, and that their marriage is with a beloved dead, and that work that they do supporting people crossing over is supported by their intimate relationship with this being that really helps that transition process be very fluid and holy and smooth, and on and on and on. My mentor, Orion Foxwood, is married to a fairy woman, a fairy queen, actually, Bree. But before I go into that, I want to just say that the word fairy and the term fairy is largely misunderstood and sort of misappropriated here in the West. We think of it as like Tinkerbell, and that is not what the fairy people are. Tinkerbell might be considered a kind of sprite or like elemental spirit, but the fairy people, and particularly the fairy seership tradition, is working with beings that are primordial. Again, we're working with these primordial, deep earth light beings that were the beings that came here before humanity and helped shape the planet before that our species arose on the planet. So they're really ancient beings, and they have deep wisdom and memory of our planet. And so Orion is married to one of the beings, and his marriage to Bree brought forth the entire lineage or the entire teaching system of fairy seership, which is rooted in Scottish Celtic tradition and lore, and also his Appalachian folklore, but was sort of his own co-creative project that is this beautiful synthesis of folklore and spirituality that he shares and teaches with students all over the planet at this point. So that's another example. Like it can bring through whole new spiritual systems.
Sure. Oh, wow. I mean, it's so powerful. I mean, it's such a new concept, and the reason for it now, it makes so much sense. But, you know, we always want to have something that kind of grounds us here. How does it, you know, how come we're ready for this? Because it does ground us into something we're meant to bring in, like that greater work. Like this is your greater work right now. And so you're really fulfilling your mission. It's kind of in the biggest way, which is such a powerful and amazing thing to be able to get to that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not everybody necessarily needs to step into a spirit marriage
Oh,
to fulfill
absolutely.
their higher
Absolutely.
mission, and
Hmm.
not everybody, we can all have spirit contacts that we work with
Hmm.
that guide us and that help us help us manifest our mission. Spirit marriage is just a way in which, so here's my, I'm going to give you my personal take on this. I believe, and this is rooted in the teachings of Barbara Marx Hubbard, who's a
Okay.
futurist.
Yeah, I know who she is. Yep.
Yeah, so Barbara talks about the Homo Universalis, and the way she has told this story, um, is that we were Homo erectus, right, for a long time, and then all of a sudden, we made this leap into Homo sapien,
Hmm.
and we don't really know. They talk about the missing link. We don't really know what was it that helped us shift from being sort of upright walking, apes to being self-aware. Um, and we're in a similar place now where we're in this being self-aware, but we need to make this leap into Homo universalis or Homo spiritus. Right? There's various terms that are used for it, but that
Hmm.
is the awareness of our global unity consciousness and all of these various ideas of awakening that we talk about. And we don't really know exactly how, what are the technologies, what are the things that are going to get us there. So I offer that spirit marriage is one of those technologies, that stepping into
Hmm.
deep, intimate, wedded relationship with these extraordinary beings back then helped our species shift and make that bridge into Homo sapien, and now at this time are here to help us make this shift into. So it's one, there are many different technologies, but I think it's one of the
Hmm.
key technologies that will help us move into this more global, expanded, where all of our extra senses are on board. And that is one of the byproducts. So, one of the byproducts of spirit marriage traditionally, when you look at it across cultures, is that it awakens the extraordinary or the extrasensory capacities of humans to be
Wow.
in these relationships, these deeply wedded relationships, these deeply bonded ones.
Well, it's so special to realize that this can happen for some people that are meant to have it happen, and it's, as you say, it's good that people are hearing that it's not everyone's meant to do it, not everyone's called to do it. And but it's just so wonderful to know that it's a potential for people. Like you said that even in your own work, you said it's a potential. And I love that because it's true. And because we've gotten to this point, which who knew we could even get to that? I mean, we're not technically, we don't know we're out in space doing things, but we are out in space everywhere. But not everybody is aware of that, and we're not being told that in public. So we have a breakaway society, just like we're learning all these things going on, and that's out of our realm of not are allowed to know. But now we're knowing this. Our spiritual work is so important because that's what we're meant to do. We are divine beings, number one,
Mhm.
and that's our key work. So what can I ask you? Because I know we got to wind it down here. So what's your this was so powerful. I think that's probably enough information about the spirit marriage, because you're writing a book, which is going to get into all the details. And so if anyone's interested, they're going to be able to, connect to that book when it comes out. And what will be the name of it?
It's called spirit marriage.
Okay, I thought
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought
it's
it
very
was.
straightforward. Spirit marriage, intimate relationships with otherworldly beings. And it's coming out through Inner Traditions Bear and Company in March of 2022.
Oh, so exciting. So exciting. And definitely we have to know when that's coming. I'd love to know
Yeah, so
that.
folks can follow me on social media or sign up for my
Mhm,
email list,
mhm.
drmeganrose.com. And I'm going to be starting this fall releasing excerpts from the book. I'll be teaching a course in the fall
Oh,
in
that's right.
advance of the book, and doing various different pre-release sort of drops of behind the scenes and early information that will be sort of trickling out in leading up to the book launch in March. So yeah, folks can find me on my website or on social media, and continue to learn more about spirit marriage and entheosis.
Yeah, Entheosis itself is just an amazing, we got into that enough, I think, that people understand what it is. So if they want to go more, they get to go more.
Yeah,
And
if they want to go more, there's a free offering that I'm making to
yeah, I was
your
going to ask you.
audience.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a whole hour-long class that I taught on entheosis. And it's called Entheosis: Cross-Cultural Spiritual Technologies for Awakening the Divine Within. And that I go into much greater detail about these different processes and different traditions, and we do a meditation. So that is, if you go to drmeganrose.com/entheosis, entheosis, and I think you have a link to that
Yes, it'll
maybe
all
you
be,
can share.
yes, all that information below. And now, is this part of the free gift offer? What is your free
Mhm.
gift offer?
Yeah,
That is it. Yeah,
that's my
that's what
free
I
gift
thought.
offer,
Yeah.
that free class.
So
Yeah.
thank you for that. That's really, really special. So I want to just ask you, what's the final message you think we need to hear about how this is all helping us right now during this pandemic and chaos we're going through, and to help people move towards their divine self, as you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to read. This is the last page of my
Ooh,
book. And
wow.
I'm going to read this to you because I think this sums it up perfectly. Now is the time for toppling paradigms that are old, outdated, and useless. Too much of our attention and consciousness has been co-opted by dualistic thinking and scarcity mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Many extraordinary beings or otherworldly beings want us to know we have all the tools we need to build sustainable, enlivening, and just societies based on the values of sharing, co-creation, and love. To do this, we must plumb the depths of our assumptions about us versus them, in versus out, upper versus lower, good versus bad, light versus dark. The only way to restore our Earth and save our species is through unity, and the primary power that will get us there is love.
Mm.
We can restore the Earth and save our species through intimate relationships with each other, both seen and unseen.
Mm. Oh, that's beautiful. That is an amazing message. Thank you. Thank you for that, Megan. And I'm just going to quickly thank our audience, and thank you all the listeners that are here today. And if as you got all the information, anything you need to know about Dr. Rose, Megan Rose, we're going to have it below. And please send us any comments, any information. If you need to know, I send them on to Megan. And we so appreciate you being here and opening your minds to such amazing understandings, and what we're so many things available to us now. It's so wonderful. And to you, Megan, I mean, you are the intrepid explorer of the sacred ancient ways, which I am so appreciative of. And you're bringing all this forth to awaken us to a level that's unimaginable. I mean, who could see that coming, right? Who could see that coming? You're a seeker of all that we are meant to be. So thank you for that, for paving the way.
Thank you,
Paving
Isla.
the
This has
way.
been a blessing. May it reach the ears that need to hear it and awaken the people that are ready to step into that same seeking adventure.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. And I am Isla Serrano Miller, and I will see you all on the next episode.